Hello again, I'm Richard Lindley and you're watching the ITN World News. A new commercially funded television station has begun broadcasting in Moscow. It's called Independent Television and says it wants to give an objective view of politics and life in Russia. Last week, President Yeltsin imposed censorship after seizing the Russian parliament from his communist and nationalist opponents. Now, with the backing of former prominent state television journalists, the independent service says it will break the authorities' monopoly on broadcast information.
The Ostankino Television Centre aims at being at the forefront of attempts by journalists to reassert their independence. As the final touches were being put on the studios, technicians and editorial staff checked equipment and rehearsed the evening's programming, which will have a strong emphasis on news and current events with a decidedly Moscow-based slant. From very modest beginnings, the station has grown, despite the odds and the upheavals of the last 2 weeks. The financial backing has come from 3 commercial banks, who insist that state broadcasting simply isn't objective enough and as thoroughgoing as the people of Moscow need. Since the collapse of communism and a deregulation in state control, there's been an explosion of interest in the news throughout the old Soviet Union. Despite the authorities' attempts, it's proved impossible to keep the CIS republics devoid of information from the wider world. The venture's backed by well-known former state broadcasters who'd become disenchanted with their former roles. As the deadline for the first night drew nearer, the station's spokesman Oleg Dobrodits said the recent events had shown the importance of having as much information in society as possible and the importance of honesty in the news. He pledged the station to greater objectivity than its rivals and a commitment to professionalism and competition.
30 British soccer fans have been expelled from the Netherlands 2 days before the England-Holland World Cup qualifying match on Wednesday night. They went on a violent rampage in the Amsterdam area. The British authorities have asked the Dutch to prosecute football fans and not just deport them. This would make it easier to prevent them from travelling to the World Cup in the United States next year.
Back in shame, 30 England football supporters arrive home after being kicked out of Holland. They're anxious to hide their faces, unlike Sunday night in Amsterdam, when they were arrested after disturbances in the city centre. To the Dutch police, they're hooligans, but these young men think of themselves as genuine football supporters who've been unjustly treated. They were unwilling to discuss what had happened, more intent on avoiding waiting photographers. Why were you arrested?
For singing.
Singing what?
Hymns. If we've been fine, they would have charged us. We've done nothing.
Herded onto a train to London, the fans lost none of their shyness.
The question now, what's the future for any of these fans who want to travel abroad with England again? The government would really like to make sure they won't be able to.
Certainly, their names will be passed to the American authorities to prevent them travelling to next year's World Cup finals.
Now, our special report. And today we look at the latest move in the drive by Britain's Conservative government to privatise state-run industries. Now it's the turn of the railways, and in the run-up to full privatisation, the government's conducting a trial scheme on the train service to one of London's major passenger airports, Gatwick. The Gatwick Express is now being run as a shadow franchise in competition with 2 other British rail divisions, offering passengers a choice of trains and prices. But with only 6 months before full privatisation, officials have yet to work out a way of charging for use of the track. Critics are predicting confusion and extra costs for the public.
At Victoria Station there are delays, holding up passengers on the country's first shadow franchise, the Gatwick Express, which is now being run as a self-contained business to test the government's plans for privatisation. Hold-ups like this will in future cost the Gatwick Express money. The man in charge of the new venture, who's sitting on a stationary train outside Victoria, plans to pass on that cost to the new rail track authority.
Today that we got a points failure coming into Victoria Station, so all the trains are delayed, some are delayed by up to half an hour. The arrangements I'll have in place with Railtrack, it will include a performance agreement, and in that performance agreement it'll be up to Railtrack to guarantee to me that they will deliver my trains through the signalling system and the point system, deliver them on time. In this particular case where we've been delayed, there will be a compensation payment to me from Railtrack.
But even though the Gatwick Express is supposed to be run as a business, it still doesn't know what its major cost is, the price it will be charged for using the tracks. That, coupled with competition from other parts of British Rail for the same passengers, could mean that the government's flagship shadow franchise might end up as a non-runner.
That's exactly what we want to see, and passengers to date have not been given the choice at Victoria or at Gatwick whether they want to use the Gatwick Express. The board, Railways Board, has always sold them the Gatwick Express ticket. One of the principal purposes of the shadow running is to see exactly, if given choice, how passengers will choose.
There are now 3 effective rail competitors for passengers to and from Gatwick Airport. The Express runs from Victoria to Gatwick and is only concerned with this route. But the South Central Division of Network South East also offers a service from Victoria to Gatwick, while the 3rd competitor is Thameslink, running from Bedford right across London to the airport and beyond. Thameslink, which remains part of British Rail, is already planning to increase the number of trains it runs to and from Gatwick, and senior managers, while hoping to increase the total number of passengers carried, are in no doubt who will benefit from the changes.
I'm sure we will take some of the market from Victoria. We are the natural provider from the City of London. Thameslink, with its 5 stations, has much better tube access and much better cross-London opportunities than Victoria does. So we will undoubtedly take some of their business.
Certainly some passengers are already aware of the opportunities of travelling to Gatwick from stations other than London Victoria.
We live in northwest London. We can come all the way through on Thameslink, so it's much more convenient for us.
Coming into Euston from the north of England, this service is more convenient. We can pick it up and it avoids going to Victoria Station and handling the luggage.
The Gatwick Express, however, identifies its market as being with foreign tourists and businessmen using the airport. And in the early phase at least, the competition between the 3 rail operations is muted. This disagreement is merely over the wording of a Thameslink poster at Gatwick, but there's clearly room for the competition to be far more intense.
Has there been much confusion about what ticket is valid on what train?
Graham Eccles, who runs Network South Central, is already offering a cheaper fare from Victoria. And as the Gatwick traffic is only a small part of a much larger business for him, there's no commercial reason why he couldn't undercut more.
My business is basically about taking people from the coast to London and back again, and it's a £200 million business. And Gatwick Express is a lot smaller than that, but it would be grossly unfair, and it wouldn't actually set up the intention of a shadow franchise for me to do that on day one. Perhaps that's something to consider downstream.
The driving imperative behind privatisation has always been to introduce private money into the system to renew track, infrastructure and rolling stock. And Gatwick Express believes that it will be able to do this. But others fear the finance just won't be there when Gatwick Express has to pay directly for rolling stock and track charges.
At present, Gatwick Express just pays the marginal cost, just pays the little extra money it costs to actually run on the track. But when you consider that it has 4 absolutely premium non-stop slots every hour, it's going to have to pay for that, so its track costs are going to be a lot more. Similarly, at the moment, its trains are written down, they don't cost it anything. Its trains are going to cost it several millions more a year. So the prospects of finding this money, I think, are slim.
In 6 months' time, the government will be able to end any speculation when it knows the real costs for running the first of the shadow franchises.
And finally, 5 19th century Dutch paintings stolen several years ago from a town in the Netherlands have been found in a garage in Australia.
The paintings were found pressed between 2 pieces of plywood. They're in poor condition, damaged by water and punctured by nails.
One of the hazards and horrors of theft of art is the loss of the quality of the work as much as it is the loss of the work.
2 of the portraits by Willem Schmidt are of Dutch royalty, King William II and Prince William of Orange. Another, by Nicolaas Pieneman, is of a tobacco company founder, Baron W.A. Schimmel-Penninck. More than $1 million worth of art was lying in a suburban garage in the Western Australian city of Perth. Police say the occupants of the house had nothing to do with the theft, but were merely storing the paintings for a friend.
They had no knowledge of the value of the paintings or where they had come from. They were simply, if you like, doing a friend a favour.
The Western Australian Fraud Squad contacted Interpol, which confirmed that the canvases had been stolen from the Dutch town of Delft. They were imported into Australia last November But customs officials didn't take much notice because there's no duty chargeable on art more than a century old.
And that's the ITN World News. From me, goodbye.
Richard Lindley with the World News. Now, the main news this morning. It's reported that over 120 England soccer fans have been arrested in Amsterdam. The latest violence there comes on the eve of England's crucial World Cup match today against Holland. From Amsterdam, ITN's Peter Staunton has sent us this report.
It's the second time in 3 nights that an English mob has gone on the rampage in Amsterdam. Once again, the trouble centred on bars in the Dam area. In the worst incident, a police officer was taken to hospital after a beer glass was smashed on his head. 160 were held during the disturbances, the Dutch police keeping their promise to arrest and detain as many as they can to try and prevent further trouble. In the morning, they'll decide who to deport and who to charge with public order offences. The incidents in Holland haven't been on the same scale as last year's in Malmo, but coming on the eve of England's most important game for 3 years, they prove that a sizable hooligan element is still active when England travel abroad. Peter Staunton, ITN, Amsterdam.
President Clinton now wants the UN to reimpose economic sanctions on Haiti after the collapse of America's latest military mission. From Washington, Bill Neely reports.
As the U.S. Navy ship Harlan County pulled away from Haiti, with 200 U.S. and Canadian troops on board, the armed men who had blocked its arrival celebrated. The guns they had used to threaten U.S. diplomats and journalists were fired in defiance of the United States. The U.S. is now hitting back at the country's military rulers.
We're going to ask the UN to reimpose economic sanctions, those which strike hardest at the individuals who are now holding up the process. Those include things like restrictions on travel, freezing overseas assets, and an oil embargo.
I want the Haitians to know that I am dead serious about seeing them honor the agreement they made.
The present Haitian leader, Raul Cedras, had agreed to resign on Friday to make way for an early return of the man he deposed as president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide. Now the entire UN plan for Haiti is in jeopardy.
We cannot let killers, after 2 years, denying what the world said through this agreement. If we don't do that, what will happen to the U.S.?
The United States may have got its ship out of Haiti. It won't be so easy to get itself out of the foreign policy mess it's now in.
That's the morning news. Goodbye for now.